In 1984, an entire community of people woke up to a completely new legal reality.
A pretty terrifying one, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. They realized they could literally go to prison just for saying the word hello in Arabic.
Oh.
I mean, think about the sheer mechanical absurdity of that for a second.
Right. Under Ordinance XX, which was passed by a military dictatorship, doing something as basic as using the standard Islamic greeting, Assalamu alaikum, became a crime.
Calling their place of worship a mosque, or even just self-identifying as a Muslim, became a criminal offense punishable by state imprisonment.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a really profound piece of source material titled The Stone the Builders Rejected. We're going to go layer by layer through the Middle East conflict, starting right at the raw physical reality on the ground, and then journeying all the way down into the deep spiritual frameworks that shape how millions of people actually understand this region. It's a fascinating, complex read, so let's jump right in.
Have you ever looked at a conflict that is so deeply entrenched, like so incredibly layered with generations of just compounded grief, that you start to wonder if it's even about politics anymore?
Yeah, it really does reach a point where the political labels just fall apart.
Exactly. And we are looking at a region today where history isn't just something you read about in a textbook. It's something you step on. It's literally in the dust.
It is. It's unavoidable.
And the source material we're mapping out for you today, it starts not with dates or treaties or, geopolitical strategies. It starts with a visceral, physical sensation. It starts with a smell.
Right, the smell of concrete dust.
Yes, the smell of concrete dust. It's accurate. It's electrical. It's the smell of pulverized homes, shattered infrastructure, and just unyielding loss. It smells like the aftermath of a storm that just never, ever ends.
That's a really haunting way to put it, but it's accurate.
And in the winter of 2023, and for the really agonizing months that followed, the entire world watched this footage pouring out of Gaza. We saw these apartment towers collapsing in slow, vertical implosions.
It's devastating imagery.
Yeah, and we saw children being carried through the rubble by men who were just weeping openly. And then right on the Israeli side of the fence, there is the searing, completely unhealed memory of October 7th.
Right, which was a day of completely shattered peace.
A profound violence and a violation of security that scarred a nation in ways that, frankly, a generation will not recover from.
No, they won't. I mean, it is the absolute imagery of a fractured world. You're looking at two peoples experiencing completely incommensurable grief.
Yeah.
And beneath all of the immediate geopolitical analysis, the military strategies and the endless cable news panels, the framework we are exploring today poses a question so ancient it has literally outlasted empires.
Which is, will there ever be peace here?
Exactly. Or, even more troublingly, are we missing the very mechanism that makes peace possible in the first place?
And that is the incredibly heavy premise of our deep dive today. We are unpacking a massive long-form manuscript titled The Stone the Builders Rejected by Iman Jihad Kadar.
It's a phenomenal piece of writing.
It really is. And our mission today is to thoroughly map out this intricate text for you. It explores how the crisis in the Middle East sits at this hyper-explosive intersection of territorial dispute, religious memory, and crucially ancient prophecy.
Right. It essentially asks whether humanity, standing right at the edge of its own destruction, even knows how to recognize the voice calling it back from the brink.
Now, I need to pause here because we are touching the third rail of global politics today, right? Active war and ancient theology.
Yeah, it doesn't get more charged than this.
Exactly. So we are acting strictly as your cartographers today. We aren't picking sides. We are just mapping out this deeply provocative framework for why this specific land keeps burning.
We aren't here to endorse any political faction.
At all. And we certainly aren't here to validate or invalidate any religious claims. We are just your guides through the provided material. Nothing more, nothing less.
And mapping that territory really has to begin with the physical reality of the land itself. You just cannot understand the theology or the politics until you understand the geometry of the situation.
The geometry, right?
Yeah, because no territory on Earth compresses so much history, so much absolute existential claim, and so much grief into such a microscopic space.
It really is tiny when you look at the numbers.
It is. Let's look at the precise physical constraints of Gaza from the text. We are talking about a strip of land roughly 41 kilometers long and anywhere from 6 to 12 kilometers wide.
So to put that into perspective for you listening, if you were driving down the highway at a normal speed limit, you could drive the entire length of the Gaza Strip in under 45 minutes.
Wow. Yeah, that really puts it in perspective.
And in that tiny, tiny sliver of land, you have approximately 2.3 million human beings. Even before the current conflict, it was already one of the most densely populated places on the planet.
But it's not just dense, right? It's contained.
Right. It is hemmed in by the Mediterranean Sea to the west, Egypt to the south, and Israel to the north and east. And it's been operating under a strict blockade that has restricted the movement of goods, materials, and people for nearly 2 decades.
And let's actually unpack the mechanism of that blockade, because it is crucial to understanding the environment here. A blockade isn't just a fence.
No, it's so much more than that.
It is the systemic, calculated restriction of building materials like cement and steel, of medical supplies, of electricity.
Right, you have an infrastructure originally designed for a fraction of that population, trying to handle the sewage, the water needs, and the energy needs of 2.3 million people.
Exactly. The power grid operates on a severe deficit. Clean water is an absolute luxury, so you have a physical containment that dictates every single aspect of daily survival.
I want to use an analogy here, one that I think really captures the kinetic energy of this situation. Think of this land as a geological fault line.
Okay, I like that.
You have these massive tectonic plates of historical grief, and when they shift, an earthquake is totally inevitable.
Right.
But Gaza specifically is like a pressure cooker sitting right on top of that fault line.
Right.
And in a pressure cooker, you need 2 things to create an explosion. You need immense heat, and you need unyielding containment.
That is the exact dynamic. The containment is the physical geography. It's the borders, the Mediterranean, the blockade, the immense population density you just cannot leave.
And the heat.
The heat is the historical trauma, the multi-generational poverty, the complete lack of political agency, and the constant abrasive friction with a heavily militarized border.
Man.
When you compress millions of people who carry a deep inherited narrative of historical displacement into a space where they literally cannot move, and you apply the heat of active conflict and restricted resources.
The explosion isn't a geopolitical anomaly.
Exactly. It is a physical certainty.
And then you travel just 75 kilometers to the northeast of this pressure cooker, and you are in Jerusalem.
Just 75 kilometers.
That is a daily commute for a lot of people in the U.S. But the contrast is staggering. Jerusalem isn't just a city on a map. It is the spiritual epicenter for half of humanity.
It's the focal point of the world's 3 major monotheistic religions.
Right. For Christians, it is the city of the Last Supper, the crucifixion, and the resurrection of Jesus. It's the geographic center of the entire Christian story of salvation.
And for the Jewish people, it carries an immense foundational spiritual weight. It's revered as the site of the first and second temples, the absolute heart of the Davidic covenant.
And the eternal, undivided capital of the Jewish people.
Yes. It is the place toward which observant Jews around the world turn when they pray. That connection is unbroken over millennia.
And for Muslims, it's the 3rd holiest city in all of Islam. It's home to the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound and the Dome of the Rock.
Which is the very place from which Islamic tradition states the Prophet Muhammad made his miraculous night journey, ascending through the heavens.
This is a city that has been conquered, reconquered, besieged, destroyed, and rebuilt over thousands of years. And the manuscript makes a pointed observation here.
What does it say?
It states, and I'm quoting here, "No conflict in the modern world so completely fuses territorial dispute, religious memory, colonial inheritance, and existential fear into a single wound that the world cannot stop picking at."
A single wound. That is the critical framing. Because when you understand that fusion of territory and theology, the catastrophic events of October 7, 2023, they become part of a much deeper continuum.
Right. Hamas, the militant organization that has governed Gaza since 2007, launched this coordinated, brutal attack that shattered whatever tense, imperfect, and heavily managed coexistence existed.
Over 1,200 Israelis were killed, and approximately 250 hostages were taken into Gaza.
It produced a psychological and political shockwave across the globe. It was an unprecedented breach of security and a day of just immense trauma.
And the response was immediate and overwhelming. We saw one of the most intensive urban bombardment campaigns in modern warfare history.
Entire neighborhoods were flattened.
Yeah. By mid-2024, the Gaza Health Ministry reported over 37,000 deaths, mass, repetitive displacement of the civilian population, and the destruction of hospitals, universities, and schools.
The material we are exploring is really meticulous in stating that both realities are true simultaneously. The terror and violation of October 7, and the catastrophic, overwhelming civilian suffering in Gaza.
And this dual reality is exactly why military solutions repeatedly, inevitably fail here.
Explain that a bit more.
Well, think about the mechanism of military force. A military can destroy infrastructure. It can collapse a tunnel network. It can neutralize armed combatants.
Right.
But a military cannot bomb a religious memory. It cannot shoot an existential fear. Each cycle of violence simply generates the profound, blood-soaked grievance that fuels the next generation's conflict.
Because if your entire family is killed in an airstrike, the military might have neutralized a tactical threat, but they have just created 5 new insurgents in the surviving extended family.
Exactly. It is a perpetual motion machine of grief.
So to understand why this machine keeps running, we have to look past the modern borders. We have to dig into the deep historical bedrock that both sides claim as their absolute, undeniable truth.
Because this conflict didn't start in 2023. It didn't start with Hamas. It didn't even start with the founding of the State of Israel in 1948.
No, you have to go down into the deep strata of religious memory and national identity. Let's trace the Jewish narrative first.
This is among the oldest documented connections between a people and a territory in human history. The Hebrew Bible describes a profound divine covenant between God and Abraham.
A covenant that is intrinsically centered on the land of Canaan.
Yes, and that covenant evolves into the Davidic kingdom, established roughly 3,000 years ago with Jerusalem as its thriving capital.
For an observant Jewish person, this isn't just interesting ancient history or like political mythology. It is sacred history. It is the absolute core of their identity.
But sacred history in this region is defined just as much by loss as it is by sovereignty. The historical memory of the Jewish people is marked by 2 cataclysmic generational wounds. You have the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians in 586 BCE.
Which led to the trauma of the first exile.
Exactly. And then the destruction of the second temple by the Roman Empire in 70 CE. That second destruction was basically an apocalyptic event for the Jewish people of antiquity.
It initiated nearly 2,000 years of diaspora.
And diaspora is a very clean academic word, but let's explain the mechanism of what that actually means.
Now, let's make it real.
It means 2 millennia of existing as a minority population scattered across the globe, frequently at the mercy of host nations that viewed them with deep suspicion or outright hatred.
It means inquisitions, expulsions, and severe systemic persecution across Europe and the Middle East.
Which brings us to the late 19th century. Early Zionism wasn't initially a religious movement in its origins. It was a desperate nationalist response to exactly that persecution.
It was a reaction to the violent European pogroms, the massacres in the Russian Empire, and the realization that Jewish assimilation in Europe was just failing.
And all of this, tragically, culminated in the horrific industrialized murder of 6 million Jews in the Holocaust.
So, if you understand that historical arc, 2,000 years of exile, ending in an attempt at complete annihilation. When the modern state of Israel was founded in 1948, the vast majority of its Jewish citizens and supporters viewed it not as a colonial enterprise, but as a long-awaited return.
It was the ultimate necessary safe haven. It was the end of a 2,000-year nightmare.
But here's where the profound, tragic duality of this land really reveals itself. To the Palestinian Arab population living on that exact land, those same events of 1948 that represented miraculous liberation for one group represented the ultimate devastating catastrophe for another.
The Arabic term for it is the Nakba.
The catastrophe.
Yeah.
The history here details the displacement of approximately 700,000 Palestinian Arabs from their ancestral towns and villages.
The destruction of hundreds of entire communities.
And the creation of a massive, multi-generational refugee crisis. And again, let's make this real for you listening. Imagine someone handing you 5 minutes to pack whatever you can carry.
You lock your front door, you put the key in your pocket, thinking you'll be back when the fighting stops.
Right. And then you never go back. And that key gets handed down to your son in a refugee camp in Lebanon, and then to his daughter in a refugee camp in Gaza.
Those descendants now number in the millions, scattered across Gaza, the West Bank, Jordan, Lebanon, and the wider world.
This displacement is the foundational bleeding wound of modern Palestinian identity.
And what is absolutely essential to grasp here, based on the text, is that both narratives are entirely real.
This isn't a zero-sum historical game where acknowledging one pain cancels out the legitimacy of the other.
Not at all. The timeline that followed 1948 is just a relentless timeline of fracture. You had the 1917 Balfour Declaration prior to the state's founding, where the British Empire essentially supported a Jewish national home while largely ignoring the political rights of the overwhelming Arab majority.
Then you have the 1967 Six-Day War, resulting in Israel capturing the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, placing millions of Palestinians under military occupation.
You have the hope and the ultimate crushing failure of the 1993 Oslo Accords, which promised a pathway to a Palestinian state but drowned in violence, expanding settlements, and political assassination.
And then the 2007 Hamas takeover of Gaza.
And it isn't just an isolated conflict between two local populations, is it?
No, not at all. The broader Muslim world is deeply implicated. You have the 57-member Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the OIC.
The Palestinian cause has been the central unifying political grievance of the Arab and Muslim world for over half a century.
Although recently we've seen the 2020 Abraham Accords, where several Arab nations normalized diplomatic and economic relations with Israel.
That signaled a massive shift in geopolitics, but functionally it only deepened the profound Palestinian feeling of abandonment.
The broader Muslim world watches the devastation in Gaza and feels an incredibly complex, volatile mixture of helplessness, implication, and shame.
Because the diplomatic structures have failed. The Arab League has failed. The United Nations has failed.
Which raises the ultimate question for you listening. How do political systems historically handle a situation where two completely distinct groups have entirely legitimate yet fundamentally contradictory existential claims to the exact same physical space?
If we look at the historical record, the brutal, honest answer is they don't. Political and diplomatic systems have, in this instance, catastrophically failed.
Colonial borders drawn by British and French diplomats, Cold War proxy rivalries, heavily negotiated peace accords, none of them have resolved the fundamental crisis of coexistence.
Okay, let me pause you right there. Because we are talking about two peoples, two religions that seem to be completely at odds geopolitically, geographically, and historically. They are locked in an existential death match.
Yeah, that's what it looks like on the surface.
But spiritually, aren't they essentially siblings? I mean, Judaism and Islam are both Abrahamic faiths. How do we reconcile this modern political hatred with their shared theological DNA? That is actually one of the most vital, illuminating paradoxes of this entire deep dive. Because despite the modern conflict, Judaism and Islam emerge from a single, common, Abrahamic spiritual root.
They are two branches of a single sacred family history.
Exactly. The material we are examining places massive emphasis on this shared foundation through the lens of both the Hebrew Bible and the Quran. Both communities trace themselves spiritually and narratively back to Abraham.
Jews trace their lineage through Isaac and Jacob, and Muslims trace theirs through Ishmael and the Arabian prophetic line culminating in the prophet Muhammad. Think of it like two massive ancient oak trees. Above ground, they look completely separate. In fact, their branches are whipping in the wind, tangling together and breaking each other in the storm.
I love that imagery.
But if you dig down into the soil, you find that they share the exact same root system. Despite centuries of political conflict, despite intense theological disagreements and historical fragmentation, both faiths continue to share incredibly specific foundational beliefs.
Precisely. We are talking about a shared, unwavering devotion to one God, a shared belief in divine revelation, in prophethood, in a sacred covenant.
Both traditions emphasize prayer, charity, fasting, adherence to a sacred moral law, and the concept of moral accountability before God.
And perhaps most importantly, they share an enduring hope for divine guidance and ultimate redemption.
And the Quran itself, being the youngest of the major Abrahamic scriptures, actually repeatedly affirms this continuity.
It does. It doesn't present itself as a completely alien new religion. It explicitly calls both Jewish and Christian communities back to the pure monotheism of Abraham.
It presents the children of Israel and the people of earlier revelation as recipients of authentic divine scripture.
Yes, the Quran goes to great lengths to establish this unbroken chain. But it also introduces a specific theological claim that is crucial to the Islamic worldview.
What's that?
It asserts that the coming of Prophet Muhammad was actually foretold within the sacred traditions of Judaism and Christianity.
Oh.
The Quran claims that many learned scholars among the people of the book in the 7th century recognized Prophet Muhammad with unmistakable certainty based on descriptions and prophecies preserved in their own scriptures.
There are two specific verses that our source material highlights that are just fascinating. Let me read them. First, Quran 2.146 says, "Those to whom we have given the scripture recognize this prophet as they recognize their own children. Yet a group of them hides the truth knowingly."
And it repeats this almost exactly in Quran 6.20. Those to whom we have given the book know this as they know their own sons.
Recognize as they recognize their own children. That phrasing is not accidental, is it?
Not at all. In classical Arabic expression, to recognize something as one recognizes one's own children signifies absolute crystal clarity.
It is a truth so evident, so intimately familiar, that it leaves zero room for doubt or confusion.
Exactly. You might mistake a stranger in a crowd, but you do not mistake your own child.
It's an incredibly powerful metaphor. But how did Islamic scholars historically interpret that?
Within the Islamic exegetical tradition, which is known as tafsir, these verses are understood to mean that the Jewish and Christian scholars, who were intimately familiar with the Torah and Gospel traditions in the 7th century, recognized the signs in Muhammad.
They recognized his lineage, his mission, his moral characteristics, and the geographical location of his arrival as perfectly matching the awaited messenger promised in their own texts. So the theology insists on profound unity and recognition, but the earthly reality is profound division and blindness.
Right, the above-ground branches of our oak tree are tearing each other apart.
And when earthly builders, politicians, diplomats, peacekeepers fail so completely to stop the branches from breaking, what happens?
Well, when human structures fail, people historically turn to a different framework entirely. They turn to the transcendent. They turn to prophecy.
And this brings us to what the text calls the architecture of messianic expectation. And I want to use another analogy here for you listening. Think about a patient with a terminal illness. They go through all the conventional medicine. They do the chemo, the radiation, the surgeries. But when the doctors finally sit down and say, "We have nothing left to offer you," the patient doesn't just give up.
No, they look for a miracle cure.
They look outside the boundaries of established science. When political science and diplomacy fail completely in the Middle East, millions of people look to ancient prophecy.
That is the exact psychological and sociological dynamic at play. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all contain profound, deeply rooted traditions of messianic expectation.
They all share a belief that human history isn't just a random series of events. It is moving toward a specific culmination.
A time of divine vindication, ultimate justice, and restored peace. Let's break down how this expectation manifests in each tradition, starting with the Jewish expectation. For millennia, there has been the profound hope for the Moshiach, the Messiah.
This is the anticipated leader from the line of David, who will bring about the final ingathering of the Jewish diaspora back to the land of Israel.
Right, and oversee the rebuilding of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, and inaugurate an era of universal global peace where God is acknowledged by all peoples.
And in Christianity, the expectation centers entirely on the second coming of Jesus. But this isn't just a passive theological hope, is it?
No, it has massive real-world geopolitical implications. We have to look at evangelical Christian Zionism, particularly as it operates in the United States.
Right.
Many within this movement interpret the establishment of the modern state of Israel not just as a political event, but as a direct, undeniable sign of prophetic fulfillment.
They believe that Jewish sovereignty in the land and the eventual rebuilding of the temple are necessary prerequisites for the return of Christ, meaning that ancient biblical prophecy is actively shaping modern foreign policy.
Yes.
A voter in Texas might support specific military funding or diplomatic stances regarding Jerusalem, not based on geopolitical stability, but based on their interpretation of the book of Revelation. The prophecy is driving the weaponry.
Exactly. And then we move to the Islamic expectation, which is deeply detailed in the Hadith literature.
Let's define Hadith really quickly for the listener. If the Quran is the foundational constitution of Islam, the Hadith are the collected sayings, actions, and daily habits of the Prophet Muhammad, recorded by his companions.
And they carry immense weight, especially regarding predictions of the future.
The Hadith describe a future period of extreme moral decline, a time of widespread corruption, terrible injustice, and ignorant, self-serving leadership.
And this dark period is prophesied to be followed by the arrival of two distinct figures. You have the Mahdi, which translates to the guided one, whose role is to restore justice and true faith to the world.
And the return of Jesus, known in Islam as Isa ibn Maryam.
Now, to understand how Prophet Muhammad saw his own place within this massive continuum of revelation, our source introduces one of the most celebrated and profound architectural metaphors in Islamic tradition.
It's a narration recorded in Bukhari Muslim. Prophet Muhammad likened the entire chain of prophets to a magnificent house built over centuries by many hands.
Let me quote the translation of that hadith because it is vital. He said, "My parable among the prophets is like a man who built a house and constructed it well and made it beautiful, except for a place of one brick in a corner. So the people started walking around it and marveling at its beauty, saying, 'Would that this brick were put in its place. I am that brick, and I am the last of the prophets.'"
It's a stunning image. You have this massive, beautiful structure. The house represents the unified structure of divine revelation stretching all the way from Abraham through Moses, David, Solomon, and Jesus, all of them acting as builders.
And finally, the structure reaches completion in Muhammad.
And notice the theological subtlety here. The final brick isn't destroying the work of the earlier prophets.
No, it isn't tearing down the house to build something new. It is presented as the completion and perfection of the structure they collectively built. It's the culmination of the Abrahamic narrative itself.
And this theme is further cemented by a Quranic declaration revealed during the prophet's final years. In Quran 5.3, it says, "This day I have perfected for you your religion and completed my favor upon you, and have approved for you Islam as your religion."
That is the absolute Islamic understanding of the completion of the Abrahamic religious edifice. The house of Abraham is spiritually completed through this final prophetic message.
But here is where we must connect this beautiful theological foundation to the harsh realities of the latter days and the anticipated return of Jesus.
Because within mainstream Orthodox Muslim belief, the expectation developed that Jesus would make a literal physical descent from heaven to defeat the forces of corruption.
But wait, if the house is already perfectly built, if the final brick is in place and the religion is perfected, why do you need Jesus to physically drop out of the sky centuries later?
That's the question.
Doesn't that imply the final brick wasn't actually enough? Furthermore, going back to my terminal illness analogy, if a patient is just waiting for a miracle cure from heaven, they might stop doing their physical therapy. They might start trying to heal themselves.
Right.
Does relying on a prophetic rescue, waiting for the Mahdi or Jesus to magically fix the Middle East, make people less likely to do the hard, grueling diplomatic work of peace building today?
That is the exact tension. If humanity believes it is waiting for an external magical superhero to crash through the ceiling and save the day, it essentially absolves itself of the responsibility to build peace.
It fosters a fatalistic mindset. Like,
Right.
the world is supposed to burn before the Savior arrives, so why try to put out the fire?
Exactly. But the text pivots here to introduce a profoundly different interpretation of these prophecies. It introduces the perspective of a specific Islamic movement from the 19th century that interpreted these prophecies not as a literal physical rescue mission, but as a mandate for profound, immediate internal reform.
And this brings us to Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. We are traveling back to the autumn of 1880 to a small town in the Punjab region of colonial India. Mirza Ghulam Ahmad publishes a massive, multi-volume work called Barahini Ahmadiyya, or The Proofs of Ahmadiyya.
And he is about to make claims that will send absolute shockwaves through the entire Muslim world.
Shockwaves almost undersells it. He introduced a paradigm shift that challenged centuries of established Orthodox consensus.
Mirza Ghulam Ahmad claimed to be the metaphorical second coming of Jesus and the promised Messiah and Mahdi foretold in Islamic prophecy. He argued that his arrival fulfilled not just the prophecies of Islam, but the messianic expectations of other major world religions as well.
But here's the massive theological twist. He completely rejected the idea that the return of Jesus would be a literal physical descent from the clouds.
Yes, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, founded by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, interprets these latter-day prophecies symbolically and spiritually rather than physically.
They argue that expecting a 2,000-year-old prophet to bodily descend from the sky contradicts both reason and the finality of the Prophet Muhammad's dispensation.
There is a very famous prophetic statement he made in his 1903 work, Tazkiratu Shahadatain, where he argued that humanity would eventually have to abandon this expectation of a literal bodily descent.
What did he write?
He wrote, "Remember that no one will descend from heaven. All our opponents who are alive today will die, and no one will see Jesus, son of Mary, coming down from heaven."
Instead, he argued that Jesus survived the crucifixion, migrated to the east to seek out the lost tribes of Israel, and eventually died a natural death in Kashmir.
Therefore, the prophecy of Jesus returning was metaphorical. It meant the arrival of a new individual born within the Muslim community who would come in the spirit, power, and character of Jesus of Nazareth.
And Mirza Ghulam Ahmad claimed to be that individual. Now, we must reiterate our disclaimer here. We're presenting these views respectfully as theological claims sincerely held by his followers today, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community.
These claims are clearly distinguished from universally accepted historical fact or mainstream Islamic scholarly consensus, which vehemently rejected his claims.
But for the purpose of our deep dive, the theological implication of his claim is what is so fascinating. Because he claimed the authority of the promised Messiah, he instituted a massive, pivotal theological shift regarding the concept of jihad.
This is the crux of his reform. The text summarizes his mission beautifully. It says, "He did not come with a sword, he came with a pen."
Mirza Ghulam Ahmad declared that the era of physical, armed jihad for the sake of religion was permanently over.
He argued that the original Islamic defensive wars were specific to the persecution of the 7th century. In the modern era, the greater jihad was entirely an internal, moral, and spiritual struggle.
It was about conquering one's own ego, defending faith through intellectual argument, the pen in establishing peace.
He emphasized interfaith solidarity, pointing everyone back to that shared Abrahamic root we discussed earlier. And he vehemently rejected violence, terrorism, or coercion as tools for religious expression.
He engaged in rigorous public intellectual debates with Christian missionaries, Hindu scholars, and mainstream Muslim clerics.
He argued that true Islamic teaching was profoundly antithetical to violence and the forced imposition of religion. It was a message of supreme reason, moral reform, and absolute loyalty to one's country of residence.
Wait, let me stop you there. Because if I am listening to this, I'm thinking, he is preaching peace. He is preaching love. He is calling for the end of armed conflict and holy war.
Right.
He's telling people to pick up a pen instead of a sword. Why in the world did this cause such a massive, violent fracture in the Muslim world? Why would a message of nonviolence be seen as a profound threat to established religious authorities?
That is the essential question. To understand the hostility, you have to understand the mechanism of religious monopoly and the geopolitical context of the time.
Okay, lay it out for us.
First, challenging established religious authority by claiming prophethood. Even a subordinate prophethood within Islam carries severe theological consequences. Mainstream Islam holds strictly to the finality of Muhammad's prophethood in a way that the clerical establishment believed precluded any new claimant.
To claim divine authority is to challenge the exclusive monopoly on interpretation held by the traditional clerics.
Right. If God is speaking to this man, then the clerics are no longer the ultimate authority.
Exactly.
But practically, it was about power. By claiming the era of the sword was over, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad wasn't just preaching peace. He was stripping the political and clerical leaders of their primary tool for mobilizing the masses.
Because if jihad is purely an internal spiritual struggle, the clerics lose their ability to raise an army in the name of God.
Exactly. Furthermore, in the context of 19th century colonial India, declaring an end to armed jihad against the British Empire was seen by many anti-colonial Muslim leaders as a massive betrayal and capitulation.
The clerical establishment, as the text notes, defined heresy far more energetically than they ever pursued peace.
Which leads us directly into what the source calls the paradox of persecution. Because the response to this community's message of peace was, and continues to be to this day, systemic violence and state-sponsored rejection.
The author documents the severe legal, social, and physical realities faced by the Ahmadiyya community. This isn't historical persecution. It is an ongoing, modern human rights crisis.
In 1974, the Parliament of Pakistan bowed to clerical pressure and amended its constitution to explicitly declare Ahmadis as non-Muslims under state law.
And it gets fundamentally more restrictive and dangerous. The text details Ordinance XX, which was imposed by the military government of General Zia-ul-Haq in Pakistan in 1984.
This ordinance literally criminalized the daily practice of faith for Ahmadis.
Let's explain the mechanism of Ordinance XX, because it is staggering. What does it actually mean for an Ahmadi Muslim living under this law?
It means that if an Ahmadi calls their place of worship a mosque, they are committing a crime. If they issue the traditional Muslim call to prayer, the adhan, they are committing a crime. If they read the Quran in public, they can be arrested for posing as a Muslim.
The text notes that they can face 3 years in prison simply for saying Assalamu alaikum, the standard Islamic greeting, which literally translates to peace be upon you.
Imagine facing years in a suffocating prison cell just for offering a standard greeting of peace to your neighbor. It's mind-boggling.
It's like being exiled from your own family, stripped of your family name, and threatened with prison simply because you keep insisting that the family needs to stop violently fighting with everyone else in the neighborhood.
The paradox the text highlights is profound and heartbreaking. The most systematically persecuted Muslim community on earth is being persecuted specifically for being too peaceable.
They are targeted, murdered, and disenfranchised because they adamantly refuse to define Islam as a martial, violent political identity.
And instead insist on dialogue, intellectual defense, and interfaith solidarity.
But despite this intense, state-sponsored persecution, the text notes the community has grown significantly. Today, there are tens of millions of members spread across more than 200 countries.
Because of the extreme danger in Pakistan, the community's headquarters had to relocate in the United Kingdom, and they are currently led by the fifth Khalifa, Mirza Masroor Ahmad.
And the author points out a fascinating detail about the Khalifa's actions on the modern geopolitical stage.
Right. From that compound in the UK over the past decade, he has sent direct personal letters to the most powerful world leaders, the presidents of the United States, Russia, China, the UK, the Pope, and leaders of Muslim-majority nations.
What do the letters actually say?
The text details that these letters are urgent, stark warnings about the dangers of escalating international conflict. Long before the current wars broke out, he was warning of the distinct possibility of a devastating global world war, a nuclear conflict.
He advocates urgently for absolute justice, for the cessation of arms trading, for dialogue over violence, and for leaders to recognize their moral accountability before God, regardless of their specific religion.
The text notes that these are public documents, though it wryly adds, whether they have been read or read seriously is a different matter.
It seems the official builders of our modern world order don't have much use for this kind of spiritual advice. They prefer the advice of generals and defense contractors.
Which brings us finally to the overarching metaphor of the entire piece, and the title of the article itself, The Stone the Builders Rejected.
The author unpacks a famous biblical verse, Psalm 118, verse 22. The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone.
It's a verse that resonates across Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It speaks to a universal, recurring human truth. That something essential, something foundational for true stability is almost always overlooked, marginalized, or violently discarded by those in power.
The Ahmadiyya community, the text explains, views Mirza Ghulam Ahmad's message exactly as this rejected stone. It was a deeply marginalized call for profound spiritual reform.
A call to recognize the shared roots of the Abrahamic faiths, a demand for interfaith dialogue and strict nonviolence.
And the religious and political establishment of the time took one look at that stone, decided it threatened their power, and threw it away.
And the author brilliantly contrasts this rejected stone with the stones that the modern geopolitical builders have chosen to use to construct the Middle East and the world order at large.
What have colonial powers, superpowers, and regional governments built their policies upon? They've built upon the stones of national self-interest.
The stones of military superiority and deterrence. The stones of performative solidarity and religious nationalism.
And the text connects the physical smoking rubble of Gaza directly back to this metaphor. The structures built by these powers are literally and metaphorically collapsing because they were built on inherently flawed stones.
You cannot build a lasting peace on a foundation of vengeance and containment.
The question the author raises isn't just a political one like who has the historical right to own the land. It's an existential one. Why do our structures relentlessly produce war?
It is a devastating, penetrating critique of the modern world order. The author argues that no military victory, no matter how decisive, can resolve what is fundamentally a spiritual and moral crisis.
The structures we build, nations, alliances, international legal systems, consistently fail and crumble because they deliberately ignore the cornerstone of moral accountability, absolute justice, and internal spiritual reform.
Before we wrap up, I think it's really worth briefly bringing in the context of the author himself, Imam Jihad Qadar, which is provided in the editorial note.
His background adds such a layer of humanity to this heavy topic.
It really does. He is a convert to Islam originally from the West Indies. He lives with severe dyslexia, and he writes beautifully about how he relies on sheer persistence and resilience to navigate texts and find spiritual guidance.
His own life story, having to find profound meaning through personal struggle and marginalization, really mirrors the ultimate theme of the article. He intimately knows what it's like to have to look past the obvious, easy mainstream structures to find something that actually holds structural weight.
It absolutely adds a layer of deep human resonance to the text. It reminds the reader that this isn't just high-level theology or abstract geopolitical theory discussed in think tanks.
It is about how individual human beings navigate a profoundly broken world, how they process grief, and how they search for truth amid the rubble of failed ideologies.
So as we close out this deep dive, I want to ask you, the listener, to actively reflect on this. Look at the geopolitical builders of our world today.
Look at the politicians, the diplomats, the leaders making decisions right now about Gaza, about Jerusalem, about global security.
Ask yourself, are they still ignoring the stones of nonviolence, absolute justice, and moral accountability simply because those stones don't win elections?
Because they don't secure military borders or satisfy the immediate, visceral human demand for vengeance.
The text strongly suggests that they are. The builders of our age have constructed a geopolitical structure that is visibly, violently failing, and they are standing in the smoking ruins of their own policies, continually wondering why the walls won't hold.
We've covered massive, complex ground today. We started with the physical, suffocating devastation in Gaza and the deep, ancient, unbreakable historical claims centered on Jerusalem.
We mapped out the trauma of the Holocaust and the Nakba. We explored the deep, shared Abrahamic root system, the oak tree of Judaism and Islam.
We moved through the profound messianic hopes of three major world religions, the Jewish Moshiach, the Christian Second Coming, the Islamic Mahdi. We explored the completed House of Prophets.
And finally, we looked at a specific, highly persecuted interpretation of Islamic prophecy that insists that peace, the internal jihad, and the absolute rejection of violence is the only valid spiritual path forward for humanity.
And the ultimate takeaway is this. Whether you personally align with any of these specific faiths or none of them, or if you are simply a citizen of the world trying to make sense of the horrific daily news cycle, the source text asks something profound of you.
It asks us to look at the rubble in Gaza, the shattered peace and trauma in Israel, and the fracturing global order, not just as an unavoidable tragedy, but as empirical evidence of a fundamentally failed way of building human societies.
Right. It forces every single one of us to look at the tools in our hands and ask, what are we building with?
And I think that leads to a final, incredibly provocative implication drawn from the text. If the official builders, our politicians, our diplomats, our institutional religious clerics, refuse to use the cornerstone of peace, shared humanity, and moral accountability, then who inherits the job of building?
Perhaps the divine blueprint wasn't meant for the political leaders at all.
Perhaps, as the source implies by focusing so heavily on internal spiritual reform, the real building site isn't a state or a parliament. The real building site is within the conscience of the individual watching the world break.
The responsibility to build peace shifts entirely from the state to the soul.
The responsibility shifts from the state to the soul. I love that.
Think back to the very beginning of our deep dive. That smell of concrete dust and electricity. The absolute destruction of the physical structures we put so much faith in.
The next time you see that dust, the next time you see that rubble on your screen, remember the author's question.
We don't have to keep building with the stones of vengeance, containment, and religious nationalism. Every structure starts with a single stone. And maybe, just maybe, it's time we start looking at the ones we've thrown away.